The first time I saw Julian Vance, he had my father's pocket watch in his hand, and I knew he was the man who destroyed him. The heavy brass timepiece, its crystal cracked over the Roman numerals, sat starkly against his black suit sleeve as he waited for the elevator in the marble lobby of the Vance Tower. 10 years of grief, of my family's quiet disintegration after my father's construction company was swallowed and dismantled by Vance's conglomerate, solidified into a single icy point of recognition. He'd kept it. A trophy. My ordinary life, the one of late shifts at the library, of careful budgeting, of tending to my mother's fragile heart, vanished in that instant. I wasn't a Lara Reed, introverted archivist. I was a daughter with a debt of anger so vast it had its own gravity. I moved before logic could catch me. The click of my sensible heels echoed like gunshots as I crossed the vast floor. He turned, alerted by the sound, and his gaze met mine. He was older than I'd imagined from the grainy newspaper photos, his presence not just wealthy but sovereign. Dark hair silvered at the temples, eyes the color of a December sea, sharp, assessing, and utterly devoid of the recognition I burned with. Mr. Vance. My voice didn't shake. It was a low, cold thing I didn't recognize. His brow lifted slightly, a silent question. He didn't speak. "That watch," I said, my eyes locked on the brass in his hand. "It belonged to Alistair Reed." Something shifted in the depths of his gaze, a shutter closing. It did. His voice was a low baritone, weathered and controlled. "And who are you to Alistair Reed?" "His daughter." I let the title hang, a challenge. "I believe it belongs to my mother." The elevator doors slid open with a hushed sigh. He didn't enter. He studied me, his look of physical weight, tracing the lines of my cheap coat, my too pale face, the defiance I held like a shield. My innocence wasn't about inexperience with men. It was about the untouched, festering wound of a betrayal I'd lived with since I was 16. I had devoted myself to being the stable one, the reliable one. Love was a risk that led to graveside visits. I'd built a life on a vow, never to be vulnerable enough to be shattered like he'd shattered us. "Ilara," he said, and the sound of my name on his lips felt like a violation. He'd known it. He'd known me, in some abstract file. "Your father was a man of his word. A rare thing." He looked down at the watch, his thumb brushing the cracked crystal. "He gave me this as collateral on a promise, not for money, for a partnership." "A partnership you dissolved and absorbed," I fired back, my hands clenched in my pockets. "He came to me," Julian Vance said, each word measured and hard. "The week before he died. He asked me to protect his assets, to lock them away from his own failing health and from other vultures. This watch was a symbol. I failed to protect the man. I did not fail to protect what was left." The world tilted. The narrative I'd clung to for a decade, the heartless corporate raid, fractured. My father had gone to him. He'd entrusted this man, this stranger, with our ruin. "You're lying," I whispered, but the conviction was gone. His winter-sea eyes held mine, unflinching. "The documents are in my private archive. The sealed trust for your mother, which she has refused to acknowledge for 10 years, is still active." He stepped closer and the air crackled. He smelled of frost and sandalwood. "You have your father's eyes, and his temper, it seems." He held out the watch. "Take it. It changes nothing." I didn't move. The truth was a vortex, pulling me under. "What trust?" "A lifeline," he said simply. "One she and you have chosen to drown rather than grasp, out of pride or grief." The insult should have enraged me. Instead, it exposed a horrifying possibility. What if our stubborn survival had been a needless martyrdom? What if he wasn't the villain, but a reluctant keeper of a lost man's plea? "I want to see," I heard myself say. "The documents. The truth." A faint, humorless line touched his mouth. "The archive is highly classified. Access is a privilege I extend to no one." "Then extend it to me." The audacity of the demand hung between us. "You said my father was a man of his word. So am I. Show me proof, or I walk out of here and spend the rest of my life knowing you for the thief I believe you to be." a long, silent battle waged in his gaze. I saw calculation, irritation, and something else, a flicker of bleak curiosity. You would sign an NDA. You would submit to a security screening. You would work under my direct supervision to earn the hours you spend in that room. No free gifts, no charity. Doing what? I asked, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. I have a collection, he said, his eyes never leaving mine. Historical correspondence, personal letters, it needs cataloging, preserving. A task for a meticulous archivist with a personal stake in the fragility of legacy. He paused. Your file from the library notes your particular sensitivity to preserving original context. He'd had me investigated. The chill deepened. And where would this work happen? Here, the top floor. You would have a suite. You would not leave the premises during the term of the contract. He said it as if dictating terms of surrender. 6 months. At the end, you will have your truth, and we will have no further connection. It was a gilded prison, a deal with a man who might be a devil or a dark angel. To live in the belly of the beast that I believed had consumed us, to either exonerate or finally condemn him with evidence. I looked at my father's watch, still in his outstretched hand. I thought of my mother's tired eyes, of the ghost of my father that lived between us in all the things we never said. This was the disruption, the earthquake. This was the chance to either heal the wound or tear it open completely. I took the watch. The brass was warm from his skin. I'll do it, I said. He gave a single slow nod. The terms will be delivered to you within the hour. Be ready to move your things tonight. He finally entered the elevator, the doors beginning to close. Just before they sealed, his eyes found mine one last time. That bleak curiosity now a steady, unsettling flame. Welcome to the Citadel, Alara Reed. I hope your truth is worth the price of admission. The doors shut, leaving me alone in the cold marble lobby, my father's broken timepiece gripped tightly in my palm. I had just chosen to walk into the lion's den, to trade my quiet, guarded life for 6 months in the fortress of the man who held the key to my family's tragedy. I had no idea if I was seeking answers, or a revenge that no longer had a clear target. I only knew I was stepping out of the shadows of my own grief and into the direct, chilling light of Julian Vance's gaze. What just happened? That wasn't a simple meeting. That was a detonation. Alara walked into that lobby fueled by a decade of righteous fury, only to have the entire foundation of her grief cracked open by a few measured sentences from Julian Vance. The villain of her family's story might be a keeper of promises, a reluctant guardian. The truth is locked in his private archive, and to get it, she's just agreed to be locked in with it. This is a slow-burn romance, which means the heat comes from the emotional friction, not just physical attraction. And the sparks are already flying. For him, Julian Vance is a fortress of control. He collects fragile histories, holds broken watches, and issues commands without raising his voice. But why? What loss or betrayal made him this way? Why did he agree to her reckless demand? Is it guilt, curiosity, or something else he doesn't even recognize yet? For her, Alara's innocence is her armor, a life built on control after chaos. She's about to have every boundary tested. She traded her quiet, predictable world for 6 months in his gilded, gated sky. What will she find in that archive? And more terrifyingly, what will she find in herself when her defining hatred is stripped away? The contract is signed. The suite awaits. The real story begins now. What will happen in Act 2? Here's a glimpse into the tension. The Citadel. Alara moves into her suite on the top floor of Vance Tower. It's luxurious, sterile, and surveilled. Every meal is delivered, every exit monitored. She is in a cage of his making, but is she a prisoner or a guest? The work. In the hushed, climate-controlled archive, she begins cataloging his collection of intimate letters, centuries of other people's love, loss, and secrets. It's a masterclass in emotional voyeurism, and it will start to wear down her own walls. The proximity. Their interactions are strict, professional, charged. A debate over the subtext of a 19th century love letter. A late-night encounter in the silent kitchen. A shared look that lasts a second too long. The slow burn is the agony and ecstasy of almost touching, almost confessing, almost seeing the man behind the myth. The reveal. We'll learn why Julian built this fortress. What past hurt made him fear the very vulnerability his collection preserves? And Alara will find the documents about her father. But will the truth set her free, or bind her to Julian in ways she never expected? The breaking point. The next part will end with a crisis of trust. A discovered lie, an outside threat, or a moment of such raw, shared vulnerability that the professional facade shatters, exposing the dangerous, undeniable pull between them. The question for the next part is no longer about revenge. It's about surrender. Who will break first? My thoughts on this story and why you should subscribe as the writer. Crafting this dynamic is thrilling. This isn't about a billionaire boss and a naive employee. It's about two people trapped in fortresses of their own making, his of wealth and control, hers of grief and judgment, who are being forced into each other's orbit. The intimacy won't come from physicality, but from the terrifying gradual dismantling of those walls. When they finally touch, it will be an earthquake. If you're hooked, if you need to know what's in that archive, why Julian keeps broken things and when Alara's defiant glare will soften into something else, then you can't miss what happens next. Subscribe now. Turn on notifications. Subscribe. Because the most dangerous contract isn't the one she signed on paper. It's the one their hearts are about to make. Life in the Citadel was a study in exquisite silence. My suite was a masterpiece of minimalist luxury, all soft grays and floor-to-ceiling windows that showed me all of Manhattan, yet made me feel completely separate from it. Meals appeared on a dumbwaiter at precise intervals. The archive was a vast, circular room 1 floor down, accessible by a private elevator that required Julian's biometric scan to operate. He provided it each morning at 8:05 a.m., his expression as impassive as the security panel. The work was its own kind of prison sentence. Julian's collection was exactly as described. Centuries of raw human feeling preserved on fragile paper. I handled love letters from soldiers who never came home, desperate missives between star-crossed lovers, the furious, ink-blotted drafts of apologies. My father's promised documents were there, I knew, locked in a sleek wall safe I passed every day. Julian had stated, the first day, that we would review them together at the midpoint of my contract, a deliberate torment. He was always present, working at a stark steel desk in the corner of the archive, a silent sovereign overseeing his domain of lost sentiments. Our interactions were clipped, professional, and charged with a tension that hummed in the sterile air. You're hesitating. His voice cut through the quiet one afternoon. I was transcribing a particularly faded letter from a Victorian botanist to his wife. I didn't look up. The ink is corroded. I'm determining the word. It could be ardent or absent. Read the preceding paragraph aloud. The request felt intimate, a violation. I swallowed. The orchid you compared me to has finally bloomed in the greenhouse. It is a monstrous, beautiful thing, and it smells, my dear, like longing itself. The silence after I spoke was thick. I could feel his gaze on the back of my neck. It's ardent, he said, his voice closer than I expected. I turned. He was standing a few feet away, not looking at the letter, but at me. He saw the bloom and his feeling intensified. He wouldn't call it absent. He was a man cataloging his own passion. You can't know that, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I know the weight of words left unsaid, he replied, his winter sea eyes holding mine. They have a shape, a pressure. Absent is a hollow word. This letter is not hollow. It is bursting. He paused. You feel it too. That's why you're hesitating. You're afraid of assigning the correct, heavier emotion. He saw too much. He turned and went back to his desk, leaving me with a pounding heart and the terrifying realization that he was right. The glimpses of his past came in fragments, never given, only inferred. A framed black and white photo of a much younger Julian with a man who shared his eyes, his father, I presumed, standing before an unfinished skyscraper. The older man's hand was on Julian's shoulder, but Julian's posture was rigid, braced. There was no warmth, only expectation. One evening, the silence of the tower was fractured by the distant, percussive boom of a summer thunderstorm. The lights flickered once, then died. plunging the archive into a deep, velvety blackness broken only by the sudden flash of lightning through the vast windows. I gasped, my hand flying to my chest. "Don't move." Julian's voice was a calm anchor in the dark. I heard the smooth shift of his chair, then the strike of a match. A warm, flickering glow illuminated his sharp features as he lit an old-fashioned kerosene lantern he kept on a shelf. He carried it over, placing it on my work table. The circle of light felt like the only safe place in the world. "The backup generator will engage in 60 seconds, he stated. But the 60 seconds stretched. The storm raged, painting the room in stark blue-white flashes. "You're not afraid of the dark," I observed quietly. He stood by the table, a tall, still shadow. "I'm afraid of what people do when the lights go out," he said, the confession stark and unexpected. "The masks come off. The careful constructs fail." He looked at me, the lantern light dancing in his eyes. "My father built this company on the principle that control was the only true asset. He believed emotion was a system failure. He was a harsh instructor." Another flash of lightning. In the burst of light, I saw not the ruthless billionaire, but a boy who had been taught that vulnerability was a fatal flaw. My hatred, already eroded by the poignant words of long-dead strangers, crumbled a little more. "My father," I heard myself say, the words pulled from me by the intimacy of the dark and the storm, "built bookcases that were slightly crooked. He always said perfection had no soul." I'd never shared that with anyone. It was a tiny, sacred memory. Julian was silent for a long moment. "I remember," he said, so softly I almost didn't hear it. "In his office, the cherry wood ones, they slanted just so." He'd noticed. He'd remembered a detail about a man he'd supposedly ruined. The lights surged back on, harsh and artificial. The moment shattered. He took a step back, his mask of impassive control slamming back into place. "Continue your work," he said, and returned to his desk. But the dam had cracked. The following days were a new kind of agony. A brush of his hand as he passed me a reference text. The way he'd sometimes pause by my station, not to critique, but to simply listen as I deciphered a line. The night I fell asleep at my desk, exhausted by a difficult translation, and woke to find his suit jacket draped over my shoulders, the scent of frost and sandalwood a ghostly embrace. The midpoint of my contract arrived. My heart was a trapped bird as he led me to the safe. He input the code, his broad shoulders blocking my view. He withdrew a simple folio of documents and laid them on the table between us. "Read," he commanded, but his voice lacked its usual steel. They were contracts, medical reports, handwritten notes. The story they told was not of betrayal, but of desperation. My father's early onset cognitive decline, a secret he'd kept from everyone but his lawyers, and somehow Julian Vance. The partnership was a legally complex, merciful shield. Vance hadn't absorbed the company out of greed. He'd executed a pre-arranged plan to salvage its assets and create a trust for my mother before my father's condition rendered him unable to do so. The deal that fell through was with another firm trying to exploit the situation. Julian had been the bulwark. My father had come to him, not as a victim to a predator, but as a drowning man to a known, formidable rock. Tears blurred the precise legalese. A decade of anger dissolved, leaving a vast, aching emptiness. "She wouldn't take the money," I whispered, finally understanding my mother's stubborn refusal. To her, it was blood money from the man who'd won. She never knew it was Alistair's final, lucid act of love. "Pride is a more enduring prison than any tower," Julian said, his gaze on my trembling hands. I looked up at him, truly seeing him for the first time. The severity of his face wasn't cruelty. It was the scar tissue from a lifetime of bearing burdens no one else could see. He had carried my family's wreckage for a decade, silently, accepting our hatred as part of the cost. Why? The question was a broken thing. Why did you do it? He was nobody to you. His jaw tightened. For a moment, I thought he wouldn't answer. Then he spoke, each word wrenched from a deep, guarded place. Because he looked me in the eye and saw a man, not a vault. He asked for my help, not my money. And in a life spent building fortresses, he stopped, his eyes searching mine, the defenses, finally, fully down. No one had ever asked me to be a sanctuary before. The air left the room. The last brick of my own fortress disintegrated. We were just two people in a quiet room, surrounded by the ghosts of other people's heartbreaks, staring at the living heart of our own. He took a step toward me. Then another. The space between us, once a vast emotional tundra, was now a charged, breathless inch. I could see the pulse in his throat, the storm of conflict in his sea-gray eyes. His gaze dropped to my lips. This was the moment. The culmination of every glance, every almost touch, every shared secret in the dark. My breath hitched. He leaned in, and the world narrowed to the heat of his presence, the promise of a surrender that felt inevitable. Then his personal phone buzzed violently on the steel desk. The sound was a shriek in the silence. He froze, his eyes closing in a brief flash of pain. When they opened, the shutters were back, sealed tight. He turned away, grabbing the phone. "Vance," he bit out, his voice cold and distant once more. He listened for a moment, his back rigid. "I'll handle it." He ended the call and didn't look at me. "A situation requires my attention. We're done for the day." He was dismissing me. The vulnerability was gone, locked away again, safer than any document. The near kiss hung in the air between us, a phantom limb of feeling. I walked back to my suite on unsteady legs, the truth about my father a heavy, sorrowful stone in my chest, and the truth about Julian Vance, a man who feared the very tenderness he secretly prized, a fresh, aching wound. The contract had promised me answers. It hadn't warned me that those answers would leave me yearning for the one thing he seemed constitutionally unable to give, not his protection, but his unguarded heart, and I was no longer sure I could survive the remaining 3 months without it. The walls are crumbling. What happens when they fall? That was torture. In the best possible way. The emotional chess game in this part was masterful. We saw the slow, agonizing, beautiful dismantling of two fortresses. Alara entered Julian's citadel armed with old hatred, only to have it replaced with a devastating, tender truth. Julian, the man of absolute control, has been guarding her family's legacy and his own capacity for softness, like a secret wound. But that phone call, that cruel, interrupting buzz, just as their masks fell, just as a decade of misunderstanding evaporated into a breath of shared air, the world slammed back in. He retreated behind his walls so fast it left emotional whiplash. The central question is no longer about the past. It's about the terrifying, vulnerable present. What will happen in the next part? The final surrender. Next part is where everything breaks open. The slow burn ignites. Here's what's at stake. The crisis. What was that phone call? An external business threat? A reminder of his duty to his cold legacy? Or something from his past that claws him back into isolation? This crisis will force a brutal choice. Protect his empire, or protect the fragile, real thing growing between them. The confrontation. Alara now holds the truth. She is no longer his contracted employee. She is the woman who saw him flinch in the dark, who wears the scent of his jacket, who knows he built a sanctuary for a stranger. She will challenge him, not with anger, but with a fearless vulnerability he has no defense against. The revelation. The virgin aspect of this story isn't just physical. It's about Alara's untouched heart, her guarded soul, finally choosing to trust, consciously, bravely, with eyes wide open. That moment of surrender will be treated with profound tenderness, a sacred exchange of trust, not just passion. The climax. Julian Vance, the collector of ghosts, the master of control, will have to abandon control. To claim her, he must first surrender himself. His greatest fear, the system failure of emotion, will become his only path to salvation. The resolution. This isn't a story that ends with a simple, "I love you." It ends with peace. With the quiet, solid safety of two people who have seen each other's ruins and chosen to build something new there, together. How do they step out of the citadel and into a shared life? The final act answers the question posed in the title. When he demands she speak her heart, Will her surrender be a whisper? Or will it require her to close the last breathless inch between them? My thoughts, and why you must subscribe. As the writer, this part was about making you feel the silence, the weight of a glance, and the significance of a shared memory in a blacked-out room. The tension is in the spaces between words. Julian's confession, "No one had ever asked me to be a sanctuary before," is the key to his entire soul. And Alara's realization that her life was built on a foundational lie is the crack that lets the light in. Their dynamic is now a live wire. The professional contract is void. All that's left is the emotional one they've silently written together. If your heart is pounding, if you need to see him fall to his knees, metaphorically or otherwise, if you need to witness the moment this man who commands empires finally learns how to beg for just one woman's heart, then you cannot miss the final. Subscribe now. The next scene is where the flame meets the kindling. It's where the slow burn becomes a conflagration of feeling that will leave you breathless. Don't just read the end of their story. Experience the surrender. Turn on notifications and subscribe now. The silence after his retreat was a living thing. It followed me back to my suite, coiled in my chest for 3 long days. Julian vanished into the upper reaches of the penthouse, the archive door remaining locked. The citadel hadn't felt like a prison before. Now, the isolation was a physical ache. I had tasted the truth about my father, about him, and his withdrawal was a punishment more effective than any anger. On the 4th morning, the elevator chimed and he was there. He looked like he hadn't slept, his usually impeccable suit jacket gone, his shirt sleeves rolled up to reveal the strong cords of his forearms. The controlled mask was back, but it was strained, a hairline fracture running through his composure. "We need to talk," he said, his voice rough. It wasn't a command. It was an admission of defeat. He led me not to the archive, but to a private sitting room I'd never seen, all dark leather and the scent of old books. A fire crackled in the hearth despite the season outside. He didn't sit. He stood before the flames, his back to me. "The phone call," he began, staring into the fire. "It was my board. They've learned of your presence here. They see a liability, a distraction. They are demanding I terminate our arrangement and settle your family's old trust immediately to neaten the narrative." He turned, his face etched with a bleak fatigue. "They believe I am becoming compromised." My heart sank. "And are you?" He didn't flinch. "Irrevocably." The word hung between us, immense and terrifying. "For 10 years, he said, stepping away from the fire's heat, closer to the cool tension where I stood, "I have curated that archive. I have held the proof of my own failure to protect a decent man. I told myself it was a penance. But you walked in, and you didn't see a penitent. You saw a thief. Your hatred was clean, uncomplicated. It was a wall I understood." He stopped, an arm's length away. "And then you started taking it down, brick by brick. Not with kindness, but with honesty. With that relentless, quiet courage that looks at a ruined thing and sees not damage, but history." "Julian," I whispered. "Let me finish," he demanded, his eyes burning. "I am a man who builds systems. I control environments, outcomes, emotions. Love is not a system. It is a catastrophic, glorious system failure. My father was right to fear it. It makes a man weak. It makes him plead. It makes him stand before a woman who should despise him and beg her to stay, even when sending her away with a fortune is the smarter, safer play. He was begging. Julian Vance was begging. "The contract is over," he said, his voice dropping to a raw scrape. "The trust is yours. You can leave today. You can have your life back, secure, free of all this." He gestured to the room, the tower, the weight of his world. "But if you choose to walk out that door, you will be taking the only part of this citadel I have ever cared about with you. You." The crisis was here. Not a threat of violence, but a threat of a life returned to grayscale. A life without the sharp, defining contrast of him. I had come for truth and found a man shattered by his own capacity for loyalty. I had come for revenge and found my heart beating in time with his quiet, steadfast pain. I didn't want safety. I wanted the dangerous, beautiful truth of him. "I'm not leaving," I said. A tremor went through him. "Alara?" I'm not leaving, I repeated, stronger. You don't get to build a sanctuary for me and then lock yourself out of it. My father asked you for help. Now I'm asking you for something else. His eyes were storm-tossed seas. What? Stop being a fortress. Be a man. Just be a man with me. The last of his control shattered. He closed the distance between us in one swift movement, his hands coming up to cradle my face. His touch not hesitant, but desperate, reverent. Do you have any idea what you're asking for? He breathed against my lips. The mess of me? The fear? I'm not afraid of your fear, I whispered back. I'm only afraid of you hiding from me. He kissed me then, and it was nothing like I'd imagined. It wasn't a claiming. It was a surrender. A slow, deep, aching giving over. It was the taste of coffee and confession, of a decade of silence finally breaking. My hands fisted in his shirt, pulling him closer, answering his surrender with my own. He drew back, his forehead resting against mine, our breaths mingling. I don't know how to do this, he admitted, the confession more intimate than the kiss. I know, I said softly. It was my truth, too. My life of guarded quiet had been its own kind of inexperience. We don't have to know. We just have to be here. He led me to his bedroom, a space as severe and beautiful as he was, all dark wood and crisp linen. There was no urgency, only a profound, trembling solemnity. Every button undone, every piece of clothing set aside, was a silent vow. He looked at me, his gaze sweeping over my bared skin with a wonder that made me feel not exposed but seen. Truly, completely seen. When we were both vulnerable, skin to skin in the fire-lit dark, he paused, his body trembling with the effort of his restraint. Tell me this is real, he whispered, his voice ragged. Tell me I'm not dreaming this. It's real, I breathed, guiding his hand to my heart, letting him feel its wild, truthful rhythm under his palm. The joining was a slow, silent conversation. A gasp, a shuddered breath, a tear he caught with his thumb. It was not about passion, but presence. Not about taking, but meeting. It was the final wordless bridge between two solitary islands. There was a brief, sharp pain, a momentary fracturing of my old self, and he went utterly still, his eyes searching mine, full of a worried tenderness that melted the sting into nothing. Alara, he whispered, a prayer and a promise. Don't stop, I answered, pulling him closer, welcoming the full, overwhelming reality of him. I'm with you. Later, wrapped in the sheets and the solid warmth of him, with the city lights glimmering far below our sacred, secluded sky, I traced the line of his jaw. The words rose in me, inevitable as dawn. They were simple, terrifying, and the only truth left. I love you, I whispered into the quiet. He went still. Then he shifted, rising on one elbow to look down at me. His face was stripped bare, all its severity softened into an awe that stole my breath. Say it again, he demanded, his voice a low, raw vibration. She met his eyes, louder or closer. A breath of something like a laugh, a release of pure joy escaped him. Both, he murmured, his lips finding my ear, then my cheek, then finally, softly, my mouth. Always both. He kissed me, deep and sweet, before pulling back just enough to let his words feather across my skin. I have spent my life building monuments to control. You walked in and made a ruin of it all. I love you, Alara Reed. I love you with a terrifying, glorious lack of restraint. We didn't leave the Citadel that night or the next day. We ordered food that went cold and talked about everything. My father's crooked bookcases, his father's impossible expectations, the lonely years that now seemed like a long, winding road that led only to this room, this bed, this peace. In the end, we did leave. Not as a prisoner and her warden, but as partners. We dissolved the old trust together, presenting my mother with the full, gentle truth. Her tears were not of grief, but of a long-delayed release. Julian quietly transferred the bulk of the assets to fund a foundation in my father's name, supporting tradesmen and small builders, men who valued soul over perfection. The final piece of my father's legacy was his pocket watch. Julian had it repaired, the crystal made clear again. He gave it back to me one evening in our new apartment, one with windows that opened to let the city noise in. "It's yours," he said. A reminder that time can move forward, that broken things can be made whole, not by hiding the cracks, but by filling them with something stronger. I took it, the brass warm, and placed it on the mantel. It was no longer a symbol of loss, but of time reclaimed, of a love that didn't erase the past, but made a future possible. That night, as I lay in the circle of his arms, the quiet between us was no longer the silence of the archive or the citadel. It was the deep, resonant quiet of a harbor after a long storm. He pressed a kiss to my temple, a simple, steadfast punctuation to our day. I had come seeking a villain and found a sanctuary. He had been guarding a tomb and found a living heart. Love was not a possession. It was the transformation that happened when two people, brave enough to be vulnerable, finally came home. And that's a wrap. You made it to the end of Ilara and Julian's emotional journey, from a lobby charged with hatred, to an archive thick with unsaid things, to a surrender that changed everything. Thank you for reading every word, for feeling every almost touch, and for trusting me to guide you through a love story built on vulnerability, not just passion. If this story resonated with you, if you love slow burns where the emotional intimacy is the real climax, then you're in the right place. I write original, heartfelt romance stories regularly. Every new story is a completely different world, with new characters, new conflicts, and new slow-burning dynamics to fall in love with. Want more stories like this? Subscribe now to get new stories delivered directly to you. Turn on notifications so you never miss a new emotional journey. What's coming next? Perhaps a stranded archaeologist and the reclusive guide who knows the desert and his own heart better than any map. Or a concert pianist who can't play anymore, and the quiet luthier next door who hears the music she's hiding. Each story is its own complete three-act escape. Subscribe now. Thank you again for reading. It's an honor to craft these worlds for you. With warmth and a well-earned happily ever after, your romance writer. Did you have a favorite moment? The near kiss in the storm? Julian's system failure confession? Let me know. I love hearing what touches your heart.